G'day guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Kaitlyn and I'm an American living in beautiful Sydney, Australia. Now, as an American, I hear a lot of Aussies comment on American gun laws, on the mass shootings and school shootings that are going on, and a lot of them will then go back to the Port Arthur Massacre of 1996, something that a lot of Americans my age and younger aren't too familiar with. But this was the mass shooting in Australia that completely reformed gun laws over here. So even though I know a little bit about it, I've never seen any news clips. I don't know too much about it. I know it happened in Port Arthur, Tasmania, and I know that up until like the mid-2010s, it was actually the largest mass shooting. Today I saw this news article, 7 Nightly News, Port Arthur Massacre, April 1996, from the channel Australian TV Fan. So as a quick little heads up and a little disclaimer, I know that a lot of my audience is a little bit older than me and a lot of my audience is Australian. So you might remember this day, you might remember this massacre very well, you might even remember this exact news clip. So, and even though this happened decades ago, there's nothing wrong with this. If you're still upset by this, if you're still triggered by this, if it's still too much to watch, I completely understand. Feel free to click out of this video. I have so many others that you guys can watch if you're more interested in it. But if you want to see what this nightly news clip was like, if you want to see my reaction to what the news actually was on the day of the Port Arthur Massacre, grab a Bicky, grab a cuppa, and let's get into this video.
Seven Nightly News is brought to you by Ansett Australia, one of the world's great airlines, and the National Australia Bank, tailoring banking to your needs.
I don't think that airline exists anymore, and I don't think that bank exists anymore, at least not under names that I know.
7 Nightly News with Anne Fulwood.
The shooting spree that's shattered dozens of lives, grief and anger tonight as a nation searches for answers to the slaughter. Good evening. All Australians tonight share the horror of the Port Arthur Massacre. 35 people are dead, 18 are injured. Police have now named the mass murderer. He is 28-year-old Martin Bryant, a local man believed to be intellectually handicapped. He's in Royal Hobart Hospital tonight, suffering burns to his upper body after running from the guest lodge that he set alight.
Less than 36 hours after the massacre at Port Arthur, and the first of the names of those slaughtered are being released. Among them, 55-year-old Mervyn Howard and his wife Mary from the tiny village of Dunstown near Ballarat in central Victoria. Well respected in the local community, they were avid churchgoers. He was the secretary of the Ballarat Football League for 14 years. They leave behind 5 children. Tonight, Mervyn...
Oh, God, a couple leaving behind 5 kids. Even if the kids are a little bit older, that's still heartbreaking. That's one of the things that's so frustrating when they start talking about the victims of these shootings, not just in Port Arthur, but any mass shooting anywhere, is that people seem so desensitized to it, especially now. And you have to remember that these victims had families, they had relatives, they probably had kids, they have friends. If one person dies in this, there are dozens and dozens of people that are affected by this. So you're talking about hundreds of people, dozens of families that have been torn apart, like just absolutely shattered over this.
Mervyn and Mary's killer lies under police guard in Royal Hobart Hospital, the same hospital in which many of his victims are still being treated. Shortly after lunch yesterday, 28-year-old Martin Bryant systematically mowed down tourists at Port Arthur. 32 were dead by the time he reached the Seascape Guest Lodge, a bed and breakfast 5 kilometres north of the penal colony. Its 2 owners were held hostage, along with a third man earlier forced into the boot of a BMW. The car was later set alight. The gunman, who was armed with several high-powered rifles, continued to shoot at police. They tried to negotiate with him until his phone battery ran out.
Our principle at the moment is to keep the house isolated and the people in it contained within the site. And we're hoping to open negotiations again. They've broken down because of some technical problems.
Special operation.
That is just... like, I didn't realize that there were hostage negotiations. I didn't realize that somebody was lit on fire in the back of a car. That is... like, that's what nightmares are made of. That's the stuff you find in horror movies. It's not the stuff that happens in rural Tasmania. Like, when I heard about this massacre, what I thought it was just somebody went and started shooting like a more populated area. I didn't realize that they were shooting at tourists. I didn't realize that this was at a B&B. I didn't realize they were hostages. This is the stuff of nightmares.
They surrounded the house, lying in wait until dawn. Then at 8 a.m, the seascape burst into flames.
The upstairs portion of it is on fire, and there are flames coming from partly down on the lower level on part of it. It's starting to slowly spread, I understand. There are still shots being fired, so at this stage I've given instructions that none of our personnel are to approach the house.
30 minutes after the blaze began, Martin Bryant fled the house, his clothes ablaze. He was arrested on the spot. His hostages could not escape the flames.
A person has been taken into police custody, conveyed to the Royal Hobart Hospital, suffering from burns, no gunshot wounds.
The killer was taken by ambulance to Hobart Hospital, under police guard and with his head covered. He'll appear in court as soon as doctors allow. Later in the day, police escorted media along the path of the rampage.
I think carnage is the simple way to describe it. It's probably the only single word that I know that would describe what was experienced in there.
The guest lodge still smouldered late into the day. Police have uncovered the remains of 2 of the hostages. They're still looking for the 3rd. Their deaths bring to 35 the number killed. 18 were injured, 4 have been discharged, 5 people are now off the critical list. Sue Stevenson, 7 Nightly News.
That is horrifying. Like, as an American who's seen dozens of mass shootings on the news, that is absolutely terrifying. I can't imagine what it would have been like being a hostage and being burnt alive. Being trapped in a car and being burnt alive. Being shot at. That's unreal. It's unbelievable. I mean, I know this happened like 25 years ago, but still, that's just tough to wrap your head around. I can't imagine what it would have been like for people seeing this on the news when it actually happened, because in the States, yeah, we get mass shootings a lot, but we're also a little bit desensitized to it because it happens so much. When something of this measure happens, I can't imagine what this would have been like for Aussies watching.
Residents of Port Arthur try to come to terms with the massacre. Some remarkable stories are emerging. They are tales of horror, lucky escapes, and of astonishing acts of bravery.
With the dead outnumbering the survivors 2 to 1, there aren't many who can tell police exactly what happened at Port Arthur yesterday. Those who can have told of how they'll be haunted by their narrow escapes. Hobart woman Karen Jones said tourists thought the sound of gunfire was part of some historic reenactment at the infamous penal settlement.
It was just like a cannon going off. We thought it was all part of the show. We were going down to check out what was going on, you know. We thought it might have been a little bit of extra on the side, so like you get the tours around there, and we thought they were letting off cannons. And
her boyfriend, Philip Milburn, says the shooting was not as random as initially reported.
I mean, if we walked past him and we went the other way and he went to the shop, I think, well, if he got out of the car and started shooting straight away, well, we might have been the first, maybe.
The shock of their encounter with the gunman was still setting in today as they recounted the panic of the scramble to safety.
A pregnant lady, Karen, she was there. She just couldn't stop vomiting. She was sort of panicky. There was an old guy upstairs. He'd lost his wife. He couldn't find her, but they found her downstairs.
He just, because he couldn't get downstairs, too many people, and everyone sort of passed the message on.
Well, they're finding it very difficult to cope, Anne, because they have no reason for why this tragedy occurred. There is no motive known. We may not ever know what the motive was, and that makes it hard for them to understand why this happened. And of course, they're grieving because they've lost a lot of the victims were local, so they've lost people, and they also feel for their town, which has been thrust into the world spotlight for all the wrong reasons.
Yes, Darren, you were one of the reporters shown around today visiting the places where these innocent people died. It must have been quite harrowing for you.
Yes, I mean, when we got to the site where a mother was carrying her 3-year-old daughter and a bullet hit them both, and they both dropped at the same time. The 6-year-old daughter ran away, trying to get away, and tried to hide behind a tree and was shot as she tried to run. I mean, just hearing those stories, and there'll be more to come out of the restaurant, people that survived in the restaurant. It must have been just a terrible thing to go through, and how...
And see, that's one of the things that will get under my skin sometimes about Aussies who bring up Port Arthur, but then will turn around and make fun of Americans and their school shootings and their mass shootings. Like, it's so easy for people halfway around the world to be detached and to comment and pick apart what's going on over in the States. But you have to remember that there are people who are being affected by this. Families are being affected by this. Children are being affected by this. So if you felt heartbroken hearing about this 6-year-old who was running away and was shot, remember the kids in the States who are learning to hide from mass shooters in their schools. And so many people won't even talk about the actual victims of the school shootings. It's all about the crazy right-wing NRA-loving nut jobs over in the States and why aren't Americans doing something? You don't think that if it was easy for us to do something, we wouldn't have done something already? If the majority of Americans are against what's going on right now with the NRA and lobbying, and they think that there needs to be at least some level of gun reform, if the majority of Americans feel that way, if it was easy, don't you think we would have done something already? Just as an American, it's so frustrating to hear, and so many Aussies will turn around all proud of the fact that their government changed the way things were back in the 90s after this shooting, and why can Americans do that? Australia isn't America. It's not. It's a very different government. It's a very different system. It's a very different mindset. It's very different types of people over there, and we live in a different day and age. Like, I could go on an entire rant about that, but no, let's see more of this news article.
People will ever get over it. One could never understand how they could deal with it.
Darren, as a news reporter, you've seen many different examples of tragedy and so forth. You've covered police rounds and such like. Have you ever seen anything like this and had any feeling like this one?
No, we've struggled all day with the numbers. I mean, it's just hard to imagine that sort of figure. You're talking now 35 people by the time we get up tomorrow morning, and that's just an enormous figure. I mean, you can't put that into perspective. When it's one or two and there's a reason behind it, you may be able to have some understanding of it, but there's no understanding of this.
Yeah. Some still too distraught to speak.
We were the lucky ones.
Others told horrifying stories of watching innocent people gunned down as they ran for their lives.
We saw one group of people run from the restaurant up the road that we came in on, and unfortunately they were the ones that he shot as he left.
We're running backwards, so we're scared he's going to shoot us in the back.
One man saw the gunman play a deadly game of cat and mouse, chasing terrified tourists through a car park, shooting them as they hid in buses.
Shot people in the bus, went out of the bus, chased people. The worst part I felt, one of the worst parts was he chased people around the bus. People hid under the bus to try and avoid him, and he got down underneath and actually shot them hiding.
Instead of returning with family snapshots of a serene holiday at Tasmania's premier tourist attraction, many people had pictures of a battleground.
People everywhere getting bandaged, just blood. I looked through the window and I saw this lady on the floor, just covered in blood.
Counselling booths were set up at some airports to help survivors cope with the trauma. Mike Amor, 7 Nightly News.
The massacre has again renewed the debate over gun laws. Prime Minister John Howard says he will push for a national gun register when he meets with federal and state police ministers next month.
These are the weapons of destruction that are all too easily available.
Yeah, I had no idea what the details were like with this Port Arthur massacre, and that is horrifying. Like, there's no... That's the word that keeps coming to mind, is just horror and horrifying. And like I said, somebody who's seen a lot of news articles, news clips about shootings and school shootings, it's tough to hear something like this as well, because these are tourists on holiday. They're not expecting something like this to happen. And it sounded like the gunman just had this perverted sense of joy doing this, like chasing people around, like he was having fun with it almost. That's so sickening. I really can't imagine what that would have been like. And this was like a pre 9/11 world. I was only 5 when this Port Arthur massacre happened. I really don't remember too much before 9/11, if I'm going to be totally honest with you guys, when it comes to what's going on with the world. That was kind of thrust upon a lot of Americans at a young age, and we were sort of forced to learn more about the world, what's going on in the world at a young age. But I can imagine what it would have been like for Aussies around that same age to hear this sort of news and to see this going on. So yeah, it's devastating. It's incredibly sad. And to be honest, I wasn't sure going into this if I wanted to watch this and if I wanted to react to it. But at the same time, part of coming over here is learning more about Australian history. Like the good, the bad, the ugly. It's not just about meat pies and surfing. It's these types of newsreels as well. What happened, the bad parts of Australia's history, including the Port Arthur Massacre. I mean, this is what did sort of kickstart the huge gun law reforms back in the 90s. So it's interesting to see, but it is heartbreaking to watch. So yeah, that's it for this video, you guys. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please hit the like and subscribe button down below. It does help support me and help support this channel, and I will see you guys in the next video.